Well, fears of a Russian civil war appear to have been short-lived. But in the last 48 hours, we have seen a massive change in the Ukraine war and Putin's leadership as a result. The Wagner Group is a network of mercenaries operating as a private army. Until recently, they had been fighting for Russia in the Ukraine war. In December 2002, US authorities estimated Wagner had 50,000 members inside Ukraine, 40,000 of which were prisoners who had been released from Russian jails. This week, its leader, Yevgeny Prigozhin, turned his forces against the military leadership in Moscow. It seems to have now been resolved, with Prigozhin set to leave for Belarus and the Wagner forces on their way back to the Ukraine. Here's what Prigozhin said today.
They wanted to disband the Wagner military company. We embarked on a march of justice on June 23. In 24 hours, we got to within 200 kilometres of Moscow. In this time, we did not spill a single drop of our fighters' blood. Now the moment has come when our blood could be spilled. Understanding responsibility for the chance that Russian blood will be spilled on one side, we are turning our columns around and going back to field camps as planned.
Let's get into what the lasting influence of these moves will be. Joining me now is Malcolm Davis from the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. Welcome, Malcolm, and thank you for your time tonight. What's been your reaction to the last 48 hours of developments in Russia?
Well, some confusion. Saturday morning, we started with Prigozhin launching this insurrection and a march up towards Rostov-on-Don, which he took with relative ease, and then moved on to Voronezh, which was the next town along that highway, with Moscow being the next city after that. And so everyone was watching how quickly this was moving, the fact that the Russian government weren't really able to stop this, and the concern was that this insurrection would turn into either a civil war or some sort of coup against the Putin regime. And certainly by the end of Saturday, as I headed to bed, that's what all the indications would happen. Sunday morning, I wake up and it's all over. Prigozhin has essentially taken a deal. He goes to Belarus. Wagner essentially goes under the control of the Russian military, and we seem to have averted a civil war. But I don't think that's the end of the story. I think it's just the beginning of the end of the Putin regime. And I think we have to watch now what happens to Putin's power base as a result of this insurrection happening on his territory.
So how close did we come to the coup you've mentioned, to a civil war, and how far away do you think that end, for which we are now at the beginning, will be?
Look, the Wagner forces were 200 kilometres away from Moscow. There was nothing stopping them effectively from marching on Moscow. Had they continued, there would have been fighting in the streets of Moscow between Wagner forces and Russian military. And, you know, that by all definition would effectively be a state of civil war. So certainly we were close to that. If elements of the Russian military had defected to Wagner's side, which was indications were that that was happening, then it could have been that Putin himself would have been under threat, and potentially for a military coup led by Prigozhin. And so you could have had a situation where you would have had fighting in the streets and potentially Putin removed from power. We then don't know who would have replaced Putin. And I think where we are now is that that ultimate finale to that particular act has been put off. But I think Putin has emerged from this vastly diminished and much more weaker. And so everyone is now watching what is happening in Ukraine in terms of the Ukrainian counteroffensive. If that goes well, then I think that Putin could be directly under threat again. And so we could then be looking at some sort of palace coup situation weeks or perhaps months down the track.